And joining us now from our New York studio is Emma Vigeland. She is a correspondent and producer for the progressive media outlet, The Young Turks. Great to have you back, Emma. 6 months ago, you told me that Joe Biden's campaign was likely not going to get off the ground till you had no grassroots support. But the point I want to ask is he is now well in the lead as the front runner. Is there a danger that as progressive candidates take the attack to them, which they can and should do, they could take it too far to, as I said, a man who possibly looks like he will be the Democratic Party's nominee?
He will not be the Democratic Party's nominee. I can tell you that. Again, we look at these candidates like in 2008, Hillary Clinton was the polling front runner, but she didn't have the grassroots support. President Obama was eventually able to win, and he had the grassroots support. And look, I actually don't think it's hurting the party. I think it's helping the party, because in 2016, the Republicans also had a very contentious primary with Donald Trump. And you know who won the presidency? Donald Trump. We have to delineate between these different candidates, and we have to hash out what these ideas are and what they mean to the average Democratic voter. And I think Joe Biden is right now skating on, longer than I thought, admittedly, this notion of electability, where he doesn't have any excuses or actual explanations for his terrible policy decisions. And so I think as the debates go on, his support is going to continue to whittle down, because people are going to figure out this entire electability conversation, it's just a myth. It's a fugazi. It doesn't make any sense. And so we have to figure out who the best candidate is to defeat Donald Trump. And we saw it in 2016. It's not corporate moderate talk. It's actually bold ideas and day-to-day things that are going to help people in their lives, economically especially. And that's why I think the progressives have an advantage.
Well, let's get into specifics. Last night's debate, who, in your view, sort of stood out or maybe made some progress towards at least getting a chance of staying in the race and getting the nomination?
In last night's debate, I thought that Tulsi Gabbard did very well at differentiating herself from someone like Kamala Harris. She clearly had a strategy, and she saw that the two major progressives in the race, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, would not be on the stage. So she saw an opportunity to go after Kamala Harris and show, you know, she may be a front runner, but I'm a progressive, and this is the difference between Kamala Harris and me. I have a ton of problems with Tulsi Gabbard's record, 100%, but I thought that she did a really good job. And someone like Andrew Yang also did well, even though he didn't speak very much, because he was so different from the other candidates. There's such a wash of moderates and people who are not saying some very interesting things, John Delaney being the primary person in that category, although he was on debate night 1. So I think that differentiating yourself and showing what you bring to the table is really important. And Tulsi Gabbard and Andrew Yang were able to do that. But I will also say that Cory Booker, I think, was the standout, because he was able to show how much better his criminal justice record is compared to Joe Biden's. And so, again, when we look at Joe Biden issue by issue by issue, he's been wrong historically for a really long time, and him and Bernie Sanders have been in Congress for a very similar amount of time. Bernie has been on the right side of history consistently. Joe Biden has been on the wrong side, and Democratic voters are starting to figure that out.
Well, speaking of Bernie Sanders, again, when we last spoke, you were certain that Sanders would emerge as the nominee and that, in fact, progressive votes would not be divided or split among some of these younger candidates. Are you still so certain, or do you think there is a chance one of those progressives, the younger ones or newer ones, will emerge out of the pack and at least pose a threat of grabbing the progressive wing of the party?
I believe I said he was the front runner. I was not certain that he would get the nomination. I'm still not certain, but I do know that he's number 2 in the polls, and that's a hard base of support as opposed to Joe Biden's, which is just people like, sure, I like Joe Biden. I think he's personable. I think he has the best chance to beat Trump. That's very soft supporting. Once Iowa rolls around, I think that that's going to dissipate. But I do think that what's interesting is that Elizabeth Warren has gotten off the ground more than I thought. I thought that there would be too much crossover between her and Bernie Sanders supporters, and that that she would not be able to make headway because Bernie would have more name recognition and just a more consistent record in terms of progressive politics. But she's actually gaining a lot of traction, and not with Bernie Sanders voters. So what I love about what Elizabeth Warren is bringing to the table is that she's winning over people who for some reason have this irrational hatred of Bernie Sanders, even though they may like his policies. And she's bringing those other policies to the table and making them mainstream and being another strong voice in this race. So it's not just Bernie on an island talking about Medicare for all, the Green New Deal, $15 minimum wage, going after corporations and Wall Street, et cetera. She's adding credence to those ideas just by being in the race. And the positive for Sanders is that she's not seemingly creeping into his support based on the polling numbers. So I think that both of them are really doing the Democratic Party and the country a great service by the way that they're campaigning.
I want to just ask you, President Trump in particular has made the focus of his tax these 4 progressive Democratic congresswomen of color. He seems to think it's perhaps a winning strategy, perhaps divide and conquer the Democrats. Does he have a point there in the sense just as a strategic point?
Again, in 2010, the Tea Party was a major force behind the Republican Party, and there was all this talk about how the Tea Party is going to divide the Republicans. During Obama's presidency, the Republicans won 1,000 seats in the United States. Division in the party is just a talking point so corporate Democrats can tell these young women to be quiet and know their role and not participate in the process. That they're not going to be deterred. They all ran on no corporate PAC money. Ayanna Pressley, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And so they are responsible and responsive to their constituents and to the people, not to their donors. And their donors are their constituents. So they're undeterred. They're not going to back down as other Democrats have. Even Democrats with more progressive inclinations, they've just been too afraid to rock the boat. But I think there's someone who's rocked the boat a little bit more, and it's the reality show host that we have as president. So these progressive Democrats get it. They know that the strong Democratic Party with a progressive base is the only way that we can defeat Trump, with ideas, not with appeasement to Republicans, because you know what? Republicans, they're pretty belligerent and they don't back down, and the Democrats need to do the same.
Okay, Emma Vigeland of the Young Turks, thank you for joining us.